What's up, guys? Today I want to talk about a question I get all the time. How much flexibility do I need? And should I be doing static stretching to increase our flexibility? Now, before we get started, I want you to understand that I'm not relying on the thousands of athletes that I've trained and the takeaways from that. The scientific literature also backs what I'm saying here. So first of all, you got to understand how much flexibility do we need? Okay, so here we have the athletes who can't drop down into adequate positions in their sport. So the ideal positions, we can't drop there. We can't drop down into a good split. You probably can't get down into a good deep squat. So these athletes are severely restricted. Now, is that mobility or is it flexibility? Flexibility, we're more so talking about the muscle itself. Mobility, we're talking about the actual joint range of motion. At the end of the day, for a hooper, we're after mobility, not flexibility. But sometimes flexibility, right, the muscle flexibility itself is the limiting factor of joint mobility. So sometimes we need to increase muscle flexibility to get that joint range of motion. So we got these guys, they can't get into proper positions. And then we got these guys who can do the splits, who can do active straight leg raise and get to 110, 120, 130 degrees. That doesn't mean that you can't get by with extreme flexibility. You might be able to get by. There's plenty of 90-year-old grandmas who smoke cigarettes their entire life and they're completely healthy. I could drive down the street without a seatbelt. I got by, but that doesn't mean that that's a good idea. I shouldn't be preaching, hey guys, don't wear a seatbelt because I got by. So the takeaway there is we don't want to be here for optimal performance and for injury reduction, and we don't want to be here. Now, there's plenty of people that get by here. There's a few people who will get by here. That doesn't mean that we make these people the gold standard. The gold standard is what's going on in here, where I can achieve every position that my sport requires, and maybe I have a little bit of a buffer zone, so maybe I can also get a little bit lower than that just in case I ever find myself in that position in my sport. So they can get into any position in sport, in any optimal position that humans should have, right? If we look over here, if you study indigenous people, if you study hunter-gatherers, they're gonna be able to deep squat because day to day they actually use these positions. They're not sitting in chairs for 8 hours a day like us. They're not wearing stiff-soled shoes like us. So their lifestyle allows them to get into these positions. Now, do they stretch their way there? Absolutely not. You're not gonna see a hunter-gatherer society doing a bunch of stretching. They don't need it because their lifestyle is active enough and they challenge these joint ranges by simply sitting in there throughout the day. Somebody like LeBron James spends time stretching, right? He probably stretches every day. I've seen videos of him stretching, but he's not extremely flexible. He probably doesn't have the joint structure to ever really be flexible and mobile. If you see him squat, he's here and he gets to right about there before he locks up, right? And so he probably has a retroverted hip where the feet are naturally going to want to point out. He's going to have external rotation, but what the research consistently shows is that retroverted hip has a hard time internally rotating. And to get into a good deep squat with relatively straightforward feet, the biggest challenge is probably going to be ankle mobility and hip internal rotation. So I don't think LeBron has the genetics to squat. And this is actually extremely common. All the time I see people who spend a lot of time stretching and they don't get any lower. So there's two scenarios. One, there is bone limitations. It's the way that our pelvis is set up. It's the way that our ankle bones are set up. Not all of us are gonna move the same. Not all of us are gonna be able to get into deep ranges of motion, okay? And there's nothing that we can do about that. But the other scenario, I believe, is even more common. And that scenario is we lose our centerpiece. So a lot of people are looking at flexibility and they're saying, man, my hamstrings are always tight. My hip flexors are always tight. And then their coach is like, yeah, you gotta stretch more. They're like, I'm stretching 3 times a day and it's not going anywhere. So this is the most common. You can feel tight, not because the muscle's short, but because it's overly lengthened already. All right, so let's talk about that. We got the centerpiece of the body. When things go wrong in the upper body, in the lower body, tight hamstrings, Achilles problem, back pain, first place we check the centerpiece. We also check the feet But the centerpiece is the thing that we have to assess first. I don't care how tight your hamstrings are, how tight your hip flexors are. We care about the position of the pelvis because that's our centerpiece. So let's say this band is your hamstrings and it originates up on the pelvis and then down here on the tibia, and we can't change the origin and insertion. I can't move this higher or lower. The hamstrings have this resting tension when I'm in a good position. But what happens for a lot of us is this, an anterior tilt. Now it either happens on the left side and not the right side, or sometimes it happens on the left and the right. And so what you get is this. What just happened? I changed my pelvic position and this band got a lot tighter. Not because it's short, because it's over lengthened. So when you're just hammering away at these hamstring stretches without knowing that you're anteriorly tipped, this is what you're doing. You're making it tighter and tighter and tighter, longer and longer and longer, and you're just tugging on it and it's not going anywhere, and your symptoms only get worse. So the problem is you're looking at flexibility as the issue. That's not the issue. That's just the byproduct. That's just the symptom. You're waking up every day and your arm itches and you're just going like this, and then it stops itching temporarily and you get on with your day. A lot of you guys, that's what you're doing with stretching. You're not getting to the root cause. Stop waking up and itching your arm. You got to go, hey man, what am I allergic to? Let's find out what I'm allergic to, and then my arm's not going to itch anymore. There's a lot of people who have over-lengthened hamstrings and they always feel tight, and they're the ones that stretch the most. There's other athletes that are in a good pelvic position and they never feel the need to stretch. They never feel tight. So let's take a look at LeBron's squat, and you can watch yourself squat from the side, watch yourself squat from the back, and you're gonna learn a lot about yourself. You're gonna learn way more than simply doing toe touches and doing flexibility tests. So this will typically show up if you just take off your shirt, you wear tights, you take pictures from the side, pictures from the front, but then also you gotta move, right? Some of us can fake it in a standing posture, but as soon as you get under some load and under some fatigue, like do a body weight squat really slow and do it until you're like 8 out of 10 burn in the muscles, and film it from the back, film it from the side, and you're gonna see what's going on with that pelvis. So like if you look at LeBron squatting, this is like legendary anterior tilt, right? It's the Instagram pose, right? An Instagram model is always like this. That's an anterior tilt, right? They wanna be here, and in the future we'll get into the implications on the diaphragm and how back pain comes about. Anyways, if you're anteriorly tipped, you're that Instagram model who's taking their picture like this. You're gonna see that, you're gonna see the rib cage flare. So if you see that there's a drop off after your rib cage, you're probably in a pretty big anterior tilt. And I don't want you guys to think that you're either posterior or anterior. There's a spectrum. So some of us are like big time anterior and it's very obvious. And then some of us are less, but you're still a little bit tipped, which still is gonna make those hamstrings tight. Now, typically, in my experience, if you're tipped forward on the left, which is really common, I don't want to go too deep into a PRI rant because this goes really, we'll do that in the future. But if you go down into a hamstring stretch and you feel like your left is a little bit tighter than your right, then your left side is probably more tipped forward, okay? And the exercises that you do would then change based on the assessment. Now, if that left side is tipped forward, this is what we're gonna see. Look at as LeBron goes down, and he doesn't even get to a deep position. As he's going down, look what we see. We see a big hip shift. So his left pelvis is higher than his right pelvis, okay? People always talk about LeBron's squat. Why doesn't he go low? If he went any lower than that, when you see that hip shift, you're going down, you see that hip shift. If you go lower than that, your back is gonna be on fire. You're gonna be injured, right? So that's assessment number one. Film yourself from the back in a squat, and when you start to see it shift, never go lower than that. And we also got a centerpiece issue going on that needs to be fixed. So if we look at him from the side and he's anteriorly tipped, and then we look at him from the back and he's got a lateral tip, well, we're probably also gonna see a shoulder dip. If you just go into an airport and you look around, you're gonna see so many right shoulder drops, okay? Let's see LeBron in a standing position. Left shoulder is way higher than right shoulder. So this is a pattern that you see over and over again in general population and especially in athletes. Right shoulder drooping one hip is higher than the other, bilateral anterior tip, or left side anterior tip. Now, why does that happen? There's a lot of reasons. It's compounded by sitting in shoes and playing sports where we dominate on one side. We're always pushing off one side harder, jumping off one side more. But the main thing is how we're set up as humans. And this is a PRI concept that you have to understand. Your right diaphragm is way bigger than your left diaphragm. So at the end of the day, humans are highly asymmetrical. We're gonna be heavier on our right side. And because of that, what do we see? Go to an airport, go to an AAU game, and start looking around. People do not stand like this. They stand in their right hip. I'm heavier to this side, and there's other reasons with the brain of why it makes more sense to stand on the right. Everybody's hanging out in the right side. So what do we get? Well, this side is compressed, this side is lengthened, right shoulder is drooped, left shoulder is high, and I know how to get into my right hip, but I don't know how to get into my left hip. And I'm using LeBron as the example because he fits this pattern pretty well, but this is so common. This is not just LeBron. Most people are either in this pattern fully, or they're trending towards this pattern, or they're gonna get to this pattern sometime in their life if they don't start taking this stuff serious. Before we move away from the LeBron example, the final piece that you're gonna see in this pattern is one leg, probably gonna be your left leg that sort of starts to spin out. And then to even it up, you're gonna do it with your right leg. And then we end up standing in this position. We end up walking in this position. And that can cause some problems for somebody. Again, for LeBron, it seems to not have caused any problems. So we're not picking on LeBron for this. But for a lot of other people, it will cause some issues. And so a lot of times when people are in this position, in that duck walk, they think, oh, I gotta spin in. I gotta work on a bunch of hip internal rotation. You gotta get your pelvis back. Once you get your pelvis back in a good position, everything else is going to start to fall into place. And then once that falls into place, if you want to do a bunch of internal rotation, then it might actually make a difference, but you got to take care of the pelvis first. Okay, now I want to get you guys started on a drill to get our pelvis in a good position. Remember, if you're posteriorly tilted already, or if you don't have any issues with your centerpiece, with your pelvis, you might not need this. It probably also won't hurt to do it. So we like to do it before our warm-ups. I put this in the speed code. I'm going to dumb it down because this stuff gets extremely complex. And this is just step one. There's so much more to it. You're gonna have to get your hamstrings going. You're gonna have to get your adductors going, your transverse abdominis, your internal obliques. All of these things are gonna work together to get that good, healthy pelvis position. I'm gonna get you started with the basics of a 90-90 hip lift. Comment down below if you want more of these. I have a bunch of other really good exercises from PRI that will help you out. There's especially one for the left diaphragm that I've seen can really make a huge difference for resetting the pelvis, getting the psoas to relax. So let me know if you want more of these. Let's get to the first exercise. For the 90-90 hip lift, I gotta put my feet up against a wall. It works way better than a box, but I'm just using a box for now. I wanna be able to lightly press my arch into that wall or into that box, and I wanna set up 90 degrees. I should be a perfect 90 here, a perfect 90 here. Don't let yourself slide too far back. Okay, it's optional to do this with a foam roller or a ball between your knees, but if you have one available, it's good to get a little bit of extra adductor involved. That's what's gonna really help set the pelvis here. So I'm gonna give a light squeeze. This is not a maximal exercise. And let me start by saying that we don't want to be sympathetically driven. So this is not maximal. We should feel pretty relaxed, okay? We're gonna get some muscle activation, but we should be pretty relaxed. From here, I wanna think about engaging my hamstrings by pulling my heels down on the wall. My feet won't actually move, but I'm thinking about almost pulling my feet into the back of my shoe, and that's gonna engage the hamstring, and that's gonna lift my hips just off the ground. This is not an actual bridge, so I don't want you coming all the way up. In fact, our back is gonna stay pushed into the ground. Almost think about it like you have a bug underneath your back, and you have to smush that bug lightly. Again, don't overpress. Don't get too intense with this exercise, but push into your ground with your lower back while you pull those heels down, and that's gonna posteriorly tilt your pelvis. If you had a tail, we would be tucking that tail, okay? From here, I should actually be able to feel my hamstrings. They should actually feel hard. They're engaged. Now, I want you to start with some simple breathing mechanics here. So put your left hand right below your belly button and take your right hand and put it on your chest. And as I inhale through the nose, I want them both to rise together. Not just that, I want 360 expansions. So I should be breathing in a way that's going to expand the lungs, it's gonna expand the back, it's gonna expand the stomach, it's gonna raise the chest. It's 360 expansion. A lot of you guys right now, the way you breathe is your stomach stays still and your chest rises and you see the rib cage flare up. We do not want that, okay? So left hand should rise, right hand should rise when you breathe in through the nose. And then we're going out through the mouth. When you come out through the mouth, we have to think about getting all of that air out. When you get all of that air out, you actually feel your core muscles, your obliques, your transverse abdominis, these really important muscles. And so getting those core muscles engaged and not our abs, right? The abdominal wall and the erectors, those aren't the muscles that we want on right now. So we want to be able to quiet those down because they like to take over. Anytime we do core stuff, because we're so used to core training and intense sports, they want to take over. We want those to relax. We want the obliques and those really deep abdominal muscles to actually engage. And so when we train those muscles along with the adductors, along with the hamstrings, we set the pelvis in a really good position, and we're training these muscles to work together for pelvic stability. Now you're gonna go 5 breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, get all of that air out. It doesn't need to be a really forceful exhale, because if you do, you might kick on that sympathetic nervous system. So just get a long, slow exhale. As you get better, you can add a little bit of a pause after the exhale. So after the exhale, right? So see how it was like a 3 to 5 second pause. As you get better, you can get to that. Don't worry about that right now because I'm giving you too many steps. Now, I know that's a lot of steps. It's a lot to remember, but just practice it and you'll start to feel it. This is an exercise where you really have to feel it out, right? You can't just go do it once and do it perfect. You got to practice it. And you can do this throughout the day, morning, afternoon, evening, before bed, post-workout. And so if you think about doing like maybe 4 to 6 sets of this throughout the day, that's gonna be good. And we do want it spread throughout the day. You don't wanna do a huge dose of it just during your workout. Now, if that's the only time you have, then do it. But in a perfect world, we would spread this throughout the day. And it also just makes us feel good, right? It not only is setting our pelvis in a good position, so all of a sudden we feel more flexible, our hamstrings don't feel so tight, everything starts to feel good, but we also just got some breathing and it relaxed us a little bit. And so then we're actually gonna be in our parasympathetic. That's where all of our rest and recovery happens. We can only regenerate cells in that parasympathetic. So if you're constantly in that stress mode, short breathing, you're not only ruining your posture, you're not only increasing your chances of injury, you're also ruining your mental health. And so this is good to do throughout the day to get back your mental health, to get back your body and be in a good position so that we can go kill it on the field and on the court. All right, guys, try it out. Like I said, do it throughout the day. Be patient with it. You're gonna get better at it over time, and that's gonna help you set that pelvic position if you are in that anterior tilt. Now, I can't assess you through YouTube, unfortunately, and so it's really tough for me to say. If you want more of this stuff, I'm gonna be posting more, and that's good for information, but you probably should get a good assessment if you are struggling and you're in a lot of pain. Now, I also want to add that stretching isn't necessarily bad all the time. In this scenario, if we've lost our pelvic positioning, then stretching is bad. It's not going to help you. It's probably going to make it worse. Like I said, your hamstrings are probably tight because they're already over lengthened. So don't just blindly stretch. But if you're already in a good pelvic position and you want to add some stretching, go ahead and do it. It's not going to be permanent, but it can temporarily help you achieve deeper ranges of motion. And then we can train and strength train in those deeper ranges. And that's when the nervous system will actually adapt and lengthen and allow for you to now drop into deeper positions in the sport. All right, until next time, I'm out.